one-dimensional piece, which normally, if you do see things like this, they're normally beautiful paintings on ceilings, but as you can see, this is not a painting. It is the story of Hercules, the traditional classic original version, so if you work your way around the room, you'll probably be able to work out the story. Now, we don't really know who did this. There are names thrown out there, but if you remember, Mary destroyed everything, so you have to look at who was in the area at the time. So in our books, we have Francesco Bizzarri and Giuseppe, two men that worked together who did this style of beauty, but they worked in a separate house elsewhere, and they do normally work on more than one. The other name is Giuseppe, a man from Italy. Very much did this style of work. He was in the area at the time. And then we have Timothy Lightoller from London and the Bastard brothers from Leicestershire, who also do this style of work, who were in the area at the time. So it could be any of them, could be all of them, could be one of them, could be none of them, but they're the names thrown around. Speaking of names, the man above the door, the bust, that is the world-renowned Austrian musician Handel, who came here for 2 weeks and played on the harpsichord in the mid-1740s. Edward V himself was only a babby, probably 5 years old at most, and would have heard his music played throughout the house, probably grown up with his music and saw him as an iconic character, a good friend of his father. Now I'm putting this out there as an opinion on my own because I went to Chatsworth, and in Chatsworth you have exactly the same bust. Yep. But in that one, he went to Chatsworth first and he has his pupils. Now if you notice there's no pupils. Admittedly they did this quite often, but maybe this is an artistic license. Maybe this is their way of saying that when he came here, he was battling cataracts.
Oh, okay.
And that's pretty much what led him to his blindness. Because he died about 10 years after he finished music, so it gives you an idea that obviously he had a bit of a struggle. Now, something else in this room, 4 pillars have been taken away. Now you can see these beautiful little flower arrangements on either side of the chandeliers. It is said that 4 pillars that used to be there and they've been taken away and sliced in half and put into the side of the room. I'll explain later why they did that. It's quite a surprise. And did you spot the unicorns? Oh, there's 47 in this room.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you spotted them. There we go. Yes, the unicorns you'll see throughout the gardens and everywhere. They are in plain sight, but almost hidden, if that makes sense. Yeah. It is the emblem of the Lee family, which is on the book just in front of you there. Ron, did you even have a light switches?
We've seen this arrangement before, the 2 pillars close together.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you've definitely seen a room like this before, if you've been to the likes of Cork Abbey and Nottinghamshire.
Yes.
It's exactly the same room.
Oh, is it? I'm going to have to look back at my pictures.
And another thing is, I went there and they had a question mark on an architect and they couldn't work out who it was. And I said, well, this room is exactly the same as the room at Stoneleigh, so it would be Francis Smith. And they worked out and like, oh yeah, it was. It was always nice when you can help them out a little bit. Now this room is what you get between 1710 and around 1730. It's pretty much the in thing at the time. It's dark mahoganies, it's oak, it's a dark, bleak but beautiful room. The furniture, well, it's all Georgian. It came in again during that period of time. And the unfortunate thing is, if I sat down in my white shirt, I'll pretty much get up in pretty much the same colour as your dress. The dye on these chairs, not on your dress, but these chairs is awful, really. They're made from the cochineal beetle, which of course we crush up and put into food colouring. Keep it in food colouring, don't put it in your nice Georgian furniture. Let's put some names to faces, shall we? Here's Miss Riggets from outside, Thomas II Baron Lee, who married the delightful Eleanor Penelope Watson, a lady who, by all accounts, was a very helpful lady to the local area. These two had children, one of them, Mr. Ego, Edward III, who surprisingly went to a place that doesn't exist anymore, a big mansion in Flint in North Wales, where the Lord said, come over for dinner. So while Edward's sitting at the dinner table having dinner, he says, I like your table, I want to buy it. Now obviously the Lord of Flint said, no, okay, I'll buy a bit of it. He did. How do you buy a bit of a table? But anyway.
Did it not fall down the other side?
That's what I mean. I don't know where the rest of the table is. But yes, it's been cut in at the back, his legs at the back have been pushed in. He knew where it was going. It's been here, I believe, since 1726, and it's under his portrait, where he wanted it to be. It just shows you his ego, really, doesn't it? I don't know how he did it. But anyway, Edward did turn to his dad and said, look, I'll go back to Europe and bring back the artistry you love. His dad said, no, marry wealth. So he married Mary Holbeach, the lady from North Warwickshire, who brought all that money into the household so Edward can build what we're currently walking through the West Wing. Now, their firstborn son was a boy called Edward, of course, who was a strong boy, an athletic boy, a perfect specimen of an inheritor. He went to London and died of smallpox.
Oh.
So this is a month before Edward's death. So in ill health, he had to begrudgingly change his will and give it to his second-born son, Thomas IV. Now, it's not the fact that they hated his son. He loved him with all his heart, but he just knew he would not live long. And that's why begrudgingly is the word. And he's right. Thomas IV barrenly died at the age of 36 within a week of his wife, which means now the house needs to be inherited. Does it go to the firstborn? No, little Thomas died in infancy. Does it go to the secondborn? No, that's a young girl called Mary. Does it go to the thirdborn? Yes, his name's Edward, he's 7, and as we've been talking about, apparently he was mad. But how mad was he? If he was alive today, would we say he had Asperger's? Would we say he was on the top level of the spectrum of the autism scale? Would we simply say he was depressed, never mourned his parents' death? He was thrust straight into power at the age of 7, then thrown out of his own home, taken to his uncle's that he didn't particularly know very well. Yes, he's with his sister, but now she's gone on education. He doesn't see her for the next 10 years or so. He then goes on his education, which he would do for the next 15 years, and then he goes on tour. Where did he go on tour? 6 months, horse and carriage and a boat. Paris is about as far as you can go. Paris is the main point of call for the British. That's where we went for our first tours. And it's almost as if you get there and you just want to go home, because there is Paris paranoia, which is personally, I think, homesickness. You get there, see all this different style of art and living, you want to go home. So normally on your second tour, you go further. The body of the spider is Paris, further legs to the other European countries afterwards. But during this period of time, syphilis was a big killer. Lead being put on your face was not the brightest of ideas, but also Edward's dad, Thomas IV. He was a very sickly man throughout his entire life. So is there something here genetic that's come into Edward's life for him to change in some fashion? But if so, why not Mary? But here's the thing with Mary, she did some peculiar things. I mean, she never married, she was very business orientated, that's fine, but to dress your servants in expensive clothing and treat them as if they were part of your family and that you would have them have meals and talk to your lords, and you've got to be very, I don't know, it's almost, you've got to really, what's the word I'm after? You've got to trust them. Yes, that trust factor. It's something that didn't happen during that time. You know, they're always on the lower pecking order. So for her to do that is peculiar. But also, the day after her brother died, barbarically if you fashion, she destroys everything. Why not keep a little bit before anything else? So there's weird things that Mary did. So maybe there was something missed. We don't know. But if you put it on a table, put the puzzle together, one day the mystery will be solved. But personally, between you and me, keep it a mystery. It could be really mundane.
Would they put lead on their face just to make them pale?
Yep. This is why these men are dying in their early 40s, 50s. They were putting lead on their face. You'd think back at their great-grandfathers, you know, they're living to their 70s, 80s and 90s, they weren't putting lead on their face.
Yeah.
Now, I've spoken about portraits a lot, and there is a reason why, and I'll get to another portrait in a moment. But firstly, we do have gentlemen's chairs here. Now, you may be thinking, well, what's the difference between a gentleman's chair and a unisex chair? The difference is these all had arms on them, just like the one in the middle. But there are little blue patches here to showcase they've been taken off and restitched afterwards. Men's chairs have arms. They are men's chairs. Ladies, you had enormous dresses. To fit into an armchair would be very uncomfortable. Reason why you have these unisex chairs. Now, we're not sure why the arms were taken off, as we've seen chairs like this in the very early 1900s in other rooms, so ladies did utilise them. But there is a story that goes around that in 1840, Lord Lee was a very business-orientated man, never really seen his 6 daughters, with the exception of 1 hour in the day, where in the evening he would read bedtime stories to them. And as there are 6 chairs here and he had 6 daughters, it kind of makes sense that they've taken the arms off so they could sit quite comfortably in their nightgown before they go to bed. And I like that, so let's keep that as a story. The emblem on the top is that of Edward III and his wife Mary Holbeach. So these are either their wedding gift or a congratulations for the build of a West Wing. It's during the same period of time. They are of a walnut gilt and the embroidery is all of Greek mythological stories. This chair may be a lot more than what I'm saying now, but it's £12,000 when I was told 8 years ago. I think sure it'd probably be higher in money now. Of course, the chair in the middle there would be a lot more because it still has its arms. Technically, if you like, these are broken. The best portrait in the house, in my opinion, is this one. Now, yes, he's out of proportion, your eyes don't deceive you, but as you do tours and you've been on many locations, there's two things to look out for in this portrait. You may know them, but you may not know them. This is Edward, who I mentioned in the other room, who died of smallpox, but it's his dad, Mr. Ego, Edward III, that's bringing this portrait into the room and conversing, saying, look where my son has travelled. They're giving you clues. Tropical flowers, ocean, mountainous range, red parakeet. He's pointing at the parrot to say, I saw one of those, or I saw loads of them, they flew over my head. So where has he been? Now I thought he'd been to Brazil or Peru, but mid-1700s, not quite. So a gentleman came here last year who was a tour guide from his own country. He opened up this book and he went, look, and it was the same portrait, and it said, Edward Leo travelled to Ceylon. So where's that? He went to Sri Lanka. What they're doing in Sri Lanka. Now apparently these red parakeets still exist in there. I've had people from Sri Lanka say yes, definitely, but more so back in the day. So it's giving you a clue where they've travelled. So always look at what characters, what people are pointing at, because it gives you an idea of where they've travelled. It doesn't have to be an animal, it could actually be like a tropical rainforest or even waterfalls or even a building of some sort. It's their way of saying that they've travelled there, especially if they're pointed, okay? There is something else in this portrait though, that every aristocracy home, not only in Britain but in Europe, would have.
The dog.
It's a pet, of course it's a pet, but look at its stance. This is something that started in France in the 1500s, and it just went like wildfire through all of Europe up until around about World War II. It kind of stopped at that point. So, what are we looking at? If a dog is on its hind legs like this, he is the firstborn son of the house. Yeah? If the dog is on all fours, like in the other room, he's the second-born son of the house. If the dog is sitting down, looking up, he's the third-born son of the house. And if the dog is laying at the foot of a man or boy, it shows respect to the master of the house. So it's first, second, third, master. It works its way down the leg. This includes if he's on a horse, the dog's doing that, still means he's first, second, third. Some countries, Scotland, Germany, for instance, they go to fifth born. Don't ask me what those last two are, I don't know. If you're a lady with a dog, I'm afraid, depending on the household, you're either a lady with a dog, or you're comfortable, security, fidelity, marriage, and in Scotland it means the same as the men, so a bit more respect up there, I think, but yeah, it's not the same. Now, I've spoken about portraits a lot, and there is a reason why, and I'll get to under the portrait now. Hands were difficult to draw. So, two hands cost more than one. One hand costs more than a couple of fingers missing. A couple of fingers missing costs more than a hand not there at all. And if you didn't put your legs in, it cost even less. So you could say it cost you a
arm and a leg.
This is why ladies have their arms in portraits, because they are not allowed to show any legs. So, for instance, if you came dressed the way you are today, then you wouldn't even be allowed in the village.
God.
So legs were not allowed to be seen. It's the main problem is the ankle. The ankle drove the men wild.
Really?
Oh yeah, drove the men wild back there. So that's why dresses are all the way to the ground. So that's why they did not mind paying to put ladies' arms in, because it's showcasing a part of beauty that you can show. And you can see by some of the hands in these portraits that they really were quite difficult to draw. Yeah, I mean that's quite horrific, and this one just on his waist, it's just not nice. Yeah. So welcome to the library. Something Jane Austen never said. Because in 1806 it wasn't a library. This was actually the bedroom. She said a red crimson velvet bed facing the fireplace. So pretty much where you're standing is where the bed would have been. The man of the house would have came through that door there after a few beverages and just fell into bed. Lady of the house would have came through that door there into a nice dressing area. And the servants would come through this door here. Now my question to you is, who's the only person who could go through all three doors?
Well, I guess it would be the lady?
The butler.
Butler.
Man of the house could go through all three, but he wouldn't. He wouldn't go through there, he wouldn't go through there. So he'd only go through the one door. Ladies could not go through there, so that's the man's room, and they wouldn't go down there. It leads to the kitchens, etc. So, the butler. Okay, this became a library in 1823. This was for this young boy here, called Stoneleigh, who was an avid author, writer, poet, lawyer, who wanted his own room to do his own private work, so that's why today we have a library. All the books before 1823 all came from Adlestrop with his dad. James Henry Lee, who, remember, was eating his dinner, eventually got here after Reverend Thomas Lee had died. The oldest book here is 1558, which is a Greek book. The newest book is 1982, which is a book based on French plays. The wood on the bookcases is known as caramandel. It's an old style of rosewood from Zambia, which I've been told now is extinct. It's known as bombonate back there. It polishes itself.
It polishes itself.
It polishes itself. We are not allowed to polish it. To give you an idea of what happens when you do polish it, let me just pull this door to. So this is where it polishes itself.
Yeah.
This is where sadly it's been polished.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Oh,
Oh dear. Yeah.
yes, leave it alone.
Leave it be.
So remember, wood never dies until it starts to rot. So that wood is technically still living and doing its job.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, famous people who've been here. I'm going to tell you a very quick story. There was a novelist that came here that finished their novel in this room, according to the diary of Lady Lee. Now, she got no reason to lie, because the novel wasn't famous until the novelist died. But if you go to the museums of this novelist, they'll always say it was a mystery to where it was finished. So maybe this mystery's now been solved. So I'll say the name, you could tell me the novel. Mary Shelley.
Oh, Frankenstein.
Frankenstein.
Yeah.
So yes, if you go in the museum down in Bath, they always say it's a mystery to where it's finished. Apparently it's finished here. So Mary and Percy Shelley, John Keats, Leigh Hunt, Charlotte Bronte, George Eliot, Jane Austen, Charles Dickens, Lord Byron, just to name a few who've been within the walls of this house and in this room. William Shakespeare was here much, much earlier, of course. One other person to mention is the lady who ran the building for 20 years, looked after her brother for 15 years and made her servants dress immaculately. And that's Mary Lee in the red dress above the cigar box there. There she is there.
She seems like a very nice person.
Yeah. One thing she hated, and it's something that she had to live with, the fact she was 4'10". She
Oh.
hated being 4'10".
I
So as
think-
you'll see in the chairs on the other side of the house, they're her chairs. So they are a lot smaller.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Lovely. Lovely.
Got to do that energy saving business. There you go. So there's normally 2 tour guides, but it's just me for the next month.
Oh, right. Okay. Very nice. Busy, isn't it?
They've got 10 minutes interior, so we can do it.
Bet you get plenty of steps in.
Oh yes, mainly backwards, weirdly. That's the oldest cricket ground in Warwickshire, built in 1838 by an 11-year-old boy called Ed Chandos Lee, who became a sports minister based in Leamington and London. He decides to keep the bowling in Leamington, that's why we of course had the Commonwealth Games, but he decides to move the tennis because he thought Europeans won't come this far inland to play tennis. So he moved it to a place called, any ideas?
Wimbledon?
Wimbledon.
Oh. Oh. Oh, we've got all the
They might be playing on
kids.
that today. Okay. So, Queen Victoria came here for 3 days and 2 nights to open up Aston Hall in Birmingham to the public as a museum. She originally was staying at Warwick Castle. She gave them 2 years' notice, but a year and a half into what they were doing and making it all perfect, she said pretty much no. So she stayed here at Stoneleigh. Now she stayed at Stoneleigh because it pretty much is where she needs to be. You've got Coventry, Warwick, Kenilworth, so it's all in the right area. Now she only gave 6 months' notice to William Henry Lee to get everything pretty much sorted. So yes, he repainted and restylised rooms. It is said that he was the one who knocked those 4 pillars down so that the Queen could eat. Not in this room, as it was the old dining room, it's too small, so she could eat in a room where, of course, she'd have the beauty of that ceiling.
Okay.
But it is said that she complained, saying it should be gilded. Yeah.
Oh my.
Also, he brings in some beautiful work here, this crockery, Minton furniture. It is said to cost a fair amount of money. It is a one of a type, but only ever used twice, really. So it's a lot of money for 2 dinners. And the food itself cost a fair amount because it was all made within the household here. So, yeah, the Queen had a nice stay. She only moaned about one thing, so that's not too bad. This is I like to call Wendy. She's come from the Netherlands. She's made out of oak, well not oak, she's pretty much been cut out of a tree, and she is solid. Now her age is 1632, as written on the back here, so she is older than the building we're currently standing in by quite a margin. She's not a 5-pounder, she's not really here to keep you company. Her job is really security. She would have been placed in the windows when, of course, family had gone on their tours. Any trespassers in the distance would look at the house, see somebody looking out, so you'd, of course, get off the land. So, yeah, pretty much security.
Maybe we should get some of those.
I always like to say, if you've ever seen the movie Home Alone.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Because at night time, if she was there at night time, you drag her back and put a candle in front, so her shadow would have flickered round. So yeah. Our final room, Queen Victoria's bedroom-ish.
Yeah.
This is the bed Queen Victoria slept in. These are the chairs Queen Victoria sat in. These are the mirrors Queen Victoria looked in, and these are the curtains that she saw open and closed morning and evening. Just not in this room. It would have been one floor above. The bed clothing itself was actually made by the royal dresses, or the royal dresswear of the maids at the time, all been stitched together, and a poor unfortunate swan that went by at the wrong time. But yes, they were made. But the Queen was very particular about what she touched and what she slept in, so she would have brought her own bed clothing nevertheless. This is all Chippendale furniture that they decided to paint over for the Queen. So yeah, let that sink in. This was actually the breakfast room. This is where all those guests that I mentioned would have had their breakfast, including Jane Austen, who sat just behind you. She'd been sunning up today with her desk, and she described what she saw. She said outside that there was a 6-foot boundary wall that ruined the view. The reason for that wall is so that you are the Lord, or your guests would look out the windows and wouldn't see any servants. They'd walk on the outside of the wall. She also said that there was the pungent smell of the animals creeping through the windows, because where the cricket ground is where the stables were. But she never mentioned the river. Now the reason she didn't is because in 1806 it wasn't there. The River Avon was actually, if you look straight across the field, there's a line of dark greenish grass and a bit of rough. That's where the river was.
Oh, right.
It ran along the tree line. So who moved it? Well, in 1809, Humphrey Repton, a landscape designer, came here with his big red book, and he moved the entire river and changed the gardens. So he moved it a field's width to where it is today. He widened it, he slowed it down using sluithways and gates so it's controlled more like a lake than a river. The undercurrent is quite strong. It runs from right to left. If you jumped in, you've got to be a good swimmer. Mm-hmm. The top half of that river can kind of flow in all directions. Depends on which way the wind is blowing, because it's controlled by the wind. It's a deceiving bit of water. Mm. But that's pretty much the end of the tour, with the exception of one squeaky little story to squeeze in before I bid you goodbye. And see you on the next tour. It's been lovely to have you on the first tour.
Pleasure. Absolutely.
Nice and easy, which I always like. Just got this door behind you.
Is this blue colour quite popular in Victorian age?
I think it was the colour that William Henry Lee did because of the Queen liking brighter colours, so it was he tried all new colours. That's what he was doing. So the final story is Harry, the chief fireman, who walked through the door on the 5th of May 1960 after the fire had been put out. He saw that these ceilings were starting to bow. He knew they were going to fall through because of the water damage, so he had to think of something quick. He pretty much stood where I am right about now, and he looked above him. Right above him, he didn't see 3 swirling clouds by the feet, what we see today. He saw cupids. He destroyed love for the love of the building by putting a hole in the ceiling that allowed all the water and fire damage to fall through, and he simply brushed out the door. Right. By doing that, he not only saved this room, this floor and the staircase, he literally saved the house. And so did William Henry Lee back in 1858, when he disregarded the advice of Queen Victoria to gilt the ceiling. If he had, it'd have been too heavy and fallen through before Harry ever walked through the door. And in 1809, Humphrey Repton saved the house when he moved the entire river towards the house so that the firemen could reach it with the hoses on that night and put the fire out in the first place.
Wow.
Things fall in place.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so we get to see this beauty.
Yeah, a tour with a twist. Well, thank you very much.
No, thank you.
Really enjoyed that very much.
Well, thank
Yeah,
you.
it was really good.